here with you today talking about sugar, what it does to your autoimmune disease, and what are some sources of sugar. This will be a great refresh for a lot of you, and sometimes we need that quick refresh to kick us in gear sometimes and be like, that's right, sugar causes inflammation. Maybe I shouldn't eat that cookie or that glass of wine tonight. But also, if you do have any questions, please drop them in the comments. If you have any opinions or thoughts, questions, whatever it may be, we'd love to hear them and keep this conversation going and interactive. But before we do so, if you are new to our community, we're just going to introduce ourselves so you know who you're talking to. I am Casey Kephart. I'm the founder of the Feel Good Formula. I'm a functional medicine nutritionist, and I work with women with all different types of autoimmune diseases to get you back to the activities you love, trash those symptoms, get your life back through diet and lifestyle. And I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the sun always shines, but I had to close my windows so you could actually see my face on camera. Jessica.
And I'm Jessica Melnick. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist, the founder of the Anti-Arthritis Method, the host of the Happy Joints Arthritis Solutions Group, and I help both women and men with various forms of arthritis get back to living life the way they choose to, not the way they have to. And I live in Saskatchewan, Canada, where the sun is shining today, but we are back to Arctic temperatures for the next 4 or 5 days. So as you can see, I'm dressed for the occasion. I had to go out this morning and I am still trying to warm up from that. So turned up the heat in the house and slowly warming up.
We're going somewhere warmer on Friday. So
That's
so
right.
Look towards that.
I'm very much excited for that. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, to warm up, let's talk about inflammation and sugar. So why are we talking about this today? Because sugar is one of those things that is a systemic inflammatory, and it contributes to your autoimmune disease. It contributes to a chronic inflammatory disease, whether that be autoimmune or not autoimmune, diabetes, obesity, skin issues, rashes, all of the things. So we want to make sure that we're very clear on what sugars and carbohydrates are and how to know how it's affecting you and some science around it in the body. So some sources of sugar that you maybe know that maybe you may be surprised about is alcohol. And first, let me say, when we're mentioning sugar, we're also mentioning forms of carbohydrates as well. Carbohydrates equal sugar. Carbohydrates break down into sugar. So there's better forms of carbohydrates than other sources, and we'll get clear on that today too. But going back to alcohol, all forms, beer, wine, liquors, these all reduce down into sugar. So I know when you're on keto or low carb, they tell you just to maybe sip on some tequila. But it's still breaking down into sugar. So even though it's 0 calories, it's pure form, you are still consuming sugar. There are fruit and root vegetables, which are carbohydrates, but those also reduce down to sugar in your body as well. Root vegetables meaning carrots or beets, fruits such as bananas, berries, melons, all of the things. And this list that we're going over is not saying you can't do these things. They're just sources of carbohydrates and sugars. We are not telling you not to eat fruits and vegetables. The next one would be too much fat or protein can reduce down to sugar in your body as well. This is called gluconeogenesis. So oftentimes, again, with keto or low carb, we often increase our protein and fat ratios. But if you're not careful and you are eating too much, you are going to get that sugar source because that's how your body is going to break it down of the excess of it. Pancakes and toast, that should be a pretty clear one. Those are rich in carbohydrates and sugars. And then all the cakes, cookies, desserts, pastries, everything that you would feel guilty about eating are those carbohydrate-rich sources that break down the glucose and spike the insulin in the body. So I'll pass it on to you, Jessica.
Yeah. So, like Casey was saying, these are various forms of sugar or carbohydrates that do break down into sugar through digestion. But not all of these sources are things that you necessarily want to avoid all the time. We just want to be really careful when we are eating sources of carbohydrates that we are getting complex carbohydrates. So, foods in their whole form, foods that contain fiber, that are going to break down slower in the body and not spike our insulin as high. And I always tell my clients too that you want to make sure if you are eating something like carbohydrates, like root vegetables, or we don't do grains on our program or legumes on our program. But if we're eating something like a root vegetable, like a sweet potato or carrots or beets or things like that, we also want to make sure that we're getting healthy fats and protein with that, because that's also going to slow down how our body is processing that. And so it's not going to spike our insulin as high, because when we have our insulin spiking, that creates inflammation among other things in our body. And especially if you are pre-diabetic or diabetic, you're going to have to be really, really careful with this. And also, I don't know if this has been proven in studies, but anecdotally, at least from my experience, when I am eating lower carb, I have a much clearer mind and I am much more energetic. So I don't know, Casey, if you've heard any science behind why that is, but go ahead if you have. I'd be really curious.
Yeah, no, it's definitely in studies. I can't quote anything, but it's the insulin response of why we feel this way. And that increased cortisol as well from eating too much sugars and carbohydrates that causes that brain fog and that fatigue. So again, don't quote me on that, but there are tons of studies out there. But it's also very individualized and based on biochemistry. So Jessica and I both feel really great on low carb, but I know there are people that I talk to all the time actually that they're like, hell no. Like I've tried it. It does not work for my body. I need X amount of carbs to function for the day. And this is true. Some bodies just need more carbohydrate sources than others, but I would try at least 2 to 4 weeks of low carb if you are interested in it and want to feel better, to see if that works for you, because you can't just try it for 2 days, because you're probably not going to feel great that 2 days, whether your body can handle it or not. So you need that 2 to 4 weeks time to really know if you can, if your body thrives off of low carb.
Absolutely. And I was one of those people not that long ago, based on like my activity level, the type of my workouts, and just the phase of life I was in, where doing low carb was just not even an option for me.
Right.
I felt like with my workouts, I needed more carbohydrates just to have the energy to do my workouts and, to feel good. But as I've gotten older and my body has changed, I also had to shift my diet. And that's one thing too, I also tell my clients is that, the diet we had 15 years ago that worked for us isn't necessarily going to be the one that works for us today. So just to be aware that we change, as we get older and our bodies change, and depending on what's going on for us. And I just wanted to touch on that, Casey, you saying the insulin response and how that affects our cortisol. Well, cortisol is a hormone that is released when we are under stress. And so if you're somebody who's already got a fairly high stress life, you could really benefit from cutting back on your carbohydrates, and or even just starting by getting rid of the simple carbohydrates. So things like added sugars and sweets, and concentrating more on the whole food forms of carbohydrates, like the root vegetables, the sweet potatoes, the, lower sugar fruits like berries and apples and things like that, in order to help bring down that cortisol and help reduce your stress.
Yeah. One other thing is candida. So if you are struggling with yeast infections, candida, bacterial vaginosis, all of these viral, yeast, bacteria issues, they can really thrive off of carbohydrates. So you are feeding into that infection when you have carbohydrates or a high carbohydrate diet. So what you want to do is starve that yeast and starve that bacteria. And how you do that is going very low carb for X amount of time to get rid of it. So oftentimes the carbohydrates, even the good carbohydrates that we are eating, are feeding that bad bacteria for our leaky gut, or the BV, the yeast, the candida. So that's a very holistic way, holistic remedy of treating those types of issues too.
Yeah. So why don't we look a little bit about sugar and insulin and how that is all connected? So again, sugar makes our insulin spike. So when we consume different types of sugar, our insulins, our pancreas is going to release insulin into our bloodstream, and the insulin is there to manage that sugar. So our insulin travels to the liver and our muscle cells, which tells them to take glucose from the bloodstream and store it. So as our insulin levels increase, our blood sugar levels then fall because it's getting the sugar out of our blood. But then at a certain point, our brain also needs glucose to function, and it calls for more glucose. So if it doesn't get the glucose it wants, it tunes out. So then we can kind of get that mental fatigue, kind of when you feel like you've hit the wall or you can't think anymore or you get brain fog. And then that creates cravings for more sugar, which can be hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. But then if this cycle doesn't stop and we just keep eating sugar, our insulin keeps pumping and through our system, and it can lead to diabetes over time. So that's when we become insulin resistant, where, our poor pancreas has just been pumping out insulin for so long. Eventually it just gets tired, or our cells they're like, oh, that insulin stuff again, like what the heck? And then it just starts ignoring. So then we just end up with too much blood sugar, with too much sugar in our blood, which can be really, really dangerous, hence leading to diabetes. So it's kind of this vicious circle that we're creating in our system if we're eating too many sources of sugar over time.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that, Casey?
I do. My doctor explained it in a really great way, actually, that I use as an analogy now. I was having problems with my insulin, actually, just because I have a genetic SNP for that. And she was saying we kind of have a gas tank of how much sugar and carbohydrates our body can thrive or hold on to and utilize. After that gas tank is full, that's when our insulin starts going haywire and we start getting those symptoms and the metabolic disease, and these issues arise. And so she was saying that usually around, at least for me, it was 75 grams of carbs, give or take, that my gas tank could hold. And she's like, once we start working on your liver and other things, hopefully your gas tank can hold more. But right now, like, we don't want you over 75 grams of carbs. So that being true for everybody, it might not be 75, but we all have a gas tank. And once it overflows, that's where all these insulin issues arise.
Yeah, I like that analogy. That's really interesting. And I know for me, one thing that drives me crazy is this myth that eating fat is what's going to give us heart disease. And this has been scientifically debunked, not like fairly recent, I would say fairly in the recent past. It hasn't been common knowledge for a long time. And I feel like just the fear that we had for so many decades about, oh, well, fat and saturated fat's going to give you heart disease, it still lingers. Like, I still feel like it was so ingrained in so many of us, especially my parents' generation too, that it's really hard for that myth to leave. And so what is really the truth is that it's actually excess simple carbohydrates and sugar that creates the thickness to the arterial walls, because excess insulin actually increases the thickness of the arterial walls because it is causing inflammation. And as a result, our body is trying to fix this inflammation and fix this damage by producing more cholesterol to actually try to fix the arterial walls, which is the opposite of what we want to happen. So it's not consuming fat, it's consuming this sugar, which is causing inflammation throughout our entire body. So just, yeah, that's like what's one of my hugest pet peeves is this idea that fat is what's creating the problem. It's actually sugar that is causing that systemic inflammation. So even if you were to have higher levels of cholesterol, if you have high HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, and your LDL, which is considered the bad cholesterol, is a little on the higher side. If you have high levels of HDL, you don't need to worry about it as much. And what you do need to look at is, are your triglycerides high? If so, that's not good. You don't want high triglycerides. Again, high triglycerides are caused by too much inflammation, which is caused from too much sugar. If your triglycerides are low and you have a little bit of a higher LDL, you're doing okay. And then there's other markers that you can look into, like C-reactive protein, which is another marker of inflammation in the body. So if your CRP is low, your triglycerides are low, and your LDL is a little bit high, but your HDL is high, you're good to go. Like, there's so much more to it than what we've been led to believe.
Yeah. And it's also if those LDL big or small particles are oxidized or not as well. So there's a lot more to look into with the LDL than just LDL, oxidation and the size of those particles. So we're not really getting the full story either. And we want a doctor that does comprehend that side of things too. But oftentimes, we're still practicing ancient medicine over here. So what are some effects of sugar that you probably feel every day and it's from sugar or maybe not, and you can start to connect the puzzle pieces now? So it can lead to an acidic digestive tract, which we don't want an acidic digestive tract that produces more candida and SIBO and yeast infections, all of those things I mentioned a little bit earlier. Arthritis. So every client of Jessica and her whole community, this, again, systemic inflammation leads to increase in joint pain, arthritic symptoms, hemorrhoids, inflammation, increased cholesterol. Jessica just talked about that. Tooth decay. Your dentist will tell you all about that. Mm-hmm. Inhibit absorption of calcium and magnesium. Those two go hand in hand. That often leads to osteoporosis and bone density issues as well. Obesity, that's a given, right? Can cause cataracts, i.e. inflammation as well. Depression, inflammation, gut to brain disorder. Can be intoxicating, like alcohol. Has anybody eaten a large chocolate bar or 2 bowls of ice cream and felt like they were hungover either that minute or the next day? I have.
Oh yeah. I call it the sugar hangover.
Exactly. And it's not fun. So we can often feel this around the holidays too. That's what you're feeling. Kidney stones, gout is a big one as well. Dehydrates newborns, but also us. Have you ever eaten ice cream and are really thirsty and you just need water after? I do. Mm-hmm. Lung cancer, slow adrenal function. So that's where this fatigue comes from, the increased stress levels, sleep issues, asthma, constipation, and cell death. And cell death or cells going haywire equals cancer. Not saying this to scare you, but sugar, like we keep saying, is a systemic inflammatory. That means it is an inflammatory from head to toe. And it just depends on your genes, on where it's going to hit and what symptoms you're going to get. So we want to keep our sugars intact. We want to have good sources of them. And lost my train of thought, but yes, Jessica?
Yeah. So why don't we look at ways that we can cut back on sugar to make it a little less painful? Because sugar is incredibly addictive. I think most of us know that just by our own experience of eating sugar. I know for me, if I eat sugar, like, and so this is one thing, I'm not a candy person. If I'm going to eat something sweet or if I'm going to crave something sweet, I want like chocolate cake with amazing chocolate icing. That's like my thing. Don't give me gummy bears. I could care less. But let's say I was to eat like 3 gummy bears, even though I don't really like them, I'm going to want more of them because of the nature of how sugar creates that response in our body. So one of the best ways
It's a
to cut,
dopamine.
yeah, it is. It's a dopamine hit. And I also feel like it gives you that like short energy burst with the crash later, but that energy burst that you get, and then you want to keep it going, so then you want to just keep eating to keep kind of feeding that furnace, but eventually you're going to crash and it's going to be really painful, hence the sugar hangover. But one of the best ways that you can cut back on sugar is to just stop it. Just stop eating it. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you can like white knuckle your way through even 2 days of not eating any type of sugary thing, you will be amazed at how your body responds. You won't crave sugar if you're not eating sugar.
Yeah.
So that's one of the huge things. And one of the ways you can do that is through intermittent fasting, which it's not right for everybody, depending on what you've got going on with your health or your life stage. But even starting with what I would call kind of like low-grade intermittent fasting. So just making sure that there's 12 hours minimum between the time that you finish eating dinner in the evening till the time you eat breakfast the next day, just to give your body that space to just process, rest, repair, do all those things, and just give yourself a chance to have your digestive system rest for at least 12 hours. So that really reduces cravings significantly, even just 12 hours. That's what I always tell my clients, minimum 12 hours between dinner and breakfast, always.
Yeah. If you look at the hourly chart of intermittent fasting, though, I'm a big guru on intermittent fasting because I'm a firm believer in it. But after 18 hours of fasting, your body starts to use your fat as energy and not insulin, glucose anymore. And I think that's actually between 16 and 18 hours, it starts to make that shift. And then after 24 hours, it starts to clean up all of those dead cells inside of you. It's called autophagy. And those dead cells, again, lead to cancer and cells going haywire, right? So there's a lot of things that happen hour by hour by hour in intermittent fasting. And like Jessica said, there's a lot of benefits in just doing 12 hours too for that brain fog, the energy, the appetite control for sure. I like to keep mine between 14 and 18 hours per day because I do find I'm more productive. My stomach feels better and less like heavy and bloated. I'm not craving as much. And I'm honestly in a happier mood. Once I eat, I feel like my everything just starts to decline a little bit, even if it's the most healthiest meal for me. I'll stop with the intermittent fasting now. But some other things that you can do to cut back on the sugar and not crave it as much is to have more quality fat and protein. So this is going to keep you fuller for longer. It's going to reduce those cravings and just feel more satiated. Another thing would be check the ingredient label. Sometimes we don't know what the heck has sugar in it. I mean, Jessica and I do this all the time too. We think we're eating something good for us, and then come to find out it has 5 grams of sugar in it, and we're eating 6 servings of it. Like that adds up. And even a gram to 5 grams of sugar can lead you craving more sugar. That's how powerful it is in our brain and how much it lights up the brain and that dopamine response, just like cocaine does. It is crazy. So check your ingredient labels at the store before you buy it to see what kind of added sugar is in there and if it's something that you want to eat on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Artificial sugars is also something to look out for, like your sweet and lows, your Splendas, erythritols, things like that. They can trick the body to spike your insulin. So that is probably worse than actually your insulin spiking because you're eating real sugar. So if you're tricking your body with, let's say, consuming sweet and low in your coffee, now your insulin's just going around not doing anything. It can't do its job of lowering glucose if there's no glucose to lower. So we have this haywire insulin in us not doing what it should be, and that is dangerous for our body, let alone the cancer effects that it contributes to, the brain fog, everything else. So, and it leads you to craving more sugar. If you're still eating something sweet or drinking something sweet, you're going to want something sweet again, right? Mm-hmm. Just eat regular sugar in that case.
Or the healthier like sweeteners that Casey and I have talked about not that long ago. So things like a lower glycemic options that are way less refined. So staying away from your classic white and brown sugars and opt for coconut sugar, maple sugar, date sugar, honey, like unpasteurized honey, like good honey, pure maple syrup, not, the artificial kinds that are based in high fructose corn syrups and all sorts of other stuff that's terrible for us, but real unrefined sources of sugar that you can replace in your baking and just make it so much like better for you. That's going to spike your insulin a lot less. And like we understand that making these changes is not always easy. And you can do things in baby steps as well. Like you don't have to jump in immediately and give up all the things. You might want to, like I said, replace it with a lower glycemic form of unrefined sugar before you completely get rid of everything, and work your way into it. And also movement. I think that's the last thing I have to say is getting exercise reduces your blood sugar. Go figure. So going for like a 10-minute walk, it's going to help you out. It's going to reduce your cravings. I find exercise too, it makes you less hungry. Your body is just using fuel more efficiently. It's just an all around wonderful thing to do. Not only that, it's like lowering your stress level as well, which is also going to lower your cortisol, which is going to lower the amount of insulin your body is producing. So win, win, win all the way around.
Yeah. I think the last little trick I have is brush your teeth after a dessert or a sugar, because oftentimes that reduces your cravings. When you're like swishing around like mint in your mouth, you don't sense that sugary mouth or taste anymore. It's a weird trick, but it works.
Ooh, that made me think of one more thing quickly. Herbal tea with some cinnamon in it. Whether you add it or it's all included in the tea, cinnamon actually helps stabilize blood sugar, and it has a slight sweet taste to it as well that really can curb your sugar and sweet cravings as well. That's one of the things I find super helpful. Like after dinner in the evenings, I love to have a cup of herbal tea that has cinnamon in it. So what I've had lately is got ginger and turmeric and cinnamon in it. Oh my goodness, it's so good.
Yeah, I love cinnamon tea, and I just bought some cinnamon sticks. I should start using them. Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. All right. If you have any questions, thoughts, opinions, please put them in the comments. If you liked this video, please put a heart on it. And Jessica will be back on Thursday with another recipe for you. I hope everybody has a good rest of your week, and talk soon.
Take care, everyone.